Man, speaking of that Bob Fitts, He Will Save You record, Lord Most High, can we just talk about that
Gosh,
song for a second? One of
gosh.
my favorite songs of all time, Don Harris, Gary Sadler tune. And man, I just remember, you know, just powerful, powerful uh, sense of the presence of the Lord in the room as we recorded that. Even though it was tracked in a studio, you could still worship. Even on a studio record with studio musicians. It's all about getting the right guys in the room,
Totally.
and helping them understand kind of what the purpose of this
Yeah.
project is and why we're recording music.
Yeah, no, and as I know you teach and you're a songwriter as well, and I know that you appreciate these things, but as I look to a song like Lord Most High, it is the template of really what is a vertical ascriptive song. And I really do
Yeah,
feel like I feel like that's the destination of worship. When I plan worship sets, I try to choose songs that end in that destination because that's the destination of worship in eternity.
that's right. Yeah.
Not to say there isn't to be a spot for songs of testimony and songs of thanksgiving. There is, but there is something that resonates with us differently when the text really doesn't mention us. It's just all ascriptive. And that lyric, throughout
Yeah.
the endless ages, you will be
You
crowned with
will be
praise.
crowned with praises.
Yeah, Lord
Lord
Most
Most
High,
High.
the sovereign of every nation, exalted over all creation, Lord Most High. From the
Yeah.
ends of the earth, your name be praised. It's
Yeah.
it just kind of hits all the bells when it comes to that. And that was really my other follow-up question for that He Will Save You project was, here's a project with, a great cover of Andy Park's The River Is Here. You got
Yeah.
you got this great hymn moment with "Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing." This is the recording that really became the popular recording of Dennis Jernigan's "You Are My All in All."
Yes. Yes.
And then you have Lord Most High, you have Bob's song "This Is the Day." Do you have any recollection of how the choir, how the singers, when you went back and recorded vocals, how people were responding in the room and how the spirit moved through that set list?
Man, I think anytime we would do any project in Nashville with singers, it was just they loved it. The singers, I think would show up with great expectation because they were singing on something that was worship. It wasn't no, but nobody was. We not to say we weren't picky about what we're getting, but it wasn't necessarily about perfection. It was like I want to hear the heart. I want to hear, and if it's out of tune, it's okay. Because I need the heart more than I need perfection.
Yeah, wasn't it Mick Jagger that said something to the effect of, "I'd rather have a bum note with all the blood, sweat, and tears than to have something like perfectly pitched and it be lifeless and emotionless."
Exactly. So, it's funny because we would encourage that, encourage them to, respond and, shout hallelujah whenever you want. We're not going to cut it out.
Yeah, and that's when I look at the Hosanna music series, like so much of what it became known for was, in the truest and best sense of the word, lively worship. It was capturing, and I've heard Don talk about this too, about, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so feel free to comment on this, but I would assume that part of your role being an A&R guy is there's this spiritual component of being a God chaser. Where is God moving? Because
That's
often
right.
at work, new songs of worship come out of that movement. Would that be accurate?
No, that was the mission statement of our A&R department. Find where God is at work. Chances are there's original songs being written. There's God-centered worship, and I was constantly on an exploratory mission looking for those things. Those little pockets. Whether it was I would get phone calls or emails about, hey man, you need to come check out this church and this worship leader. Man, there's something going on here. I'd be adding it to my list and hopping on a plane or trying to reroute myself there, while if I was out on a trip, just to pop in, sit in the back, be a kind of a an anonymous observer in the back, and oftentimes they wouldn't even know I was there. Just kind of wanted to not have any fanfare or integrity music is coming today. Because if they knew that, they would put on a show, right?
Or
And so I just kind of wanted to see the authentic, what is God doing, and that's how we, kind of went about it. That we did the same thing with Brownsville, when we heard God is doing it, and it happened to be in Pensacola, which is an hour drive. I remember it was probably a Thursday night. John Chisholm and I jumped in my car and we drove over and stood in line to get in and sat in the congregation like anybody else would have sat in the congregation, and um, went down for prayer, at the end of during the prayer altar ministry at the end, which was kind of a big part of what Brownsville was doing. And that that was kind of the genesis of us, partnering with Brownsville to try to harvest, the worship that was happening there.
that's incredible. And the music ministry of Lindell Cooley and what he was doing. What do you remember about first meeting Lindell and hearing his heart and hearing really what God was doing through that revival?
Man, gosh, I could talk for an hour about Lyndall and the impact that Brownsville and that outpouring had on me, because you got to understand, man, I was a Baptist kid, and so this was a stretch. I know you talk about Toronto blessing and stuff, but for me, that stuff was like, I don't know what to think, yet I vividly remember, so after that, exploratory trip, John and I came back and we were like, man, absolutely need to figure something out here. Why don't we have them come over and minister at chapel on a Wednesday morning? So, I mean, the whole Brownsville crew showed up, including John Kilpatrick and Steve Hill, the guy who was the evangelist, and Lyndall and his team, worship team, came over, and that was that probably the most powerful chapel service ever in integrity. It wrecked our company for the whole day. Like I just remember coworkers just laid out on the floor everywhere you could see, this this haze in the room, which I can only describe as the glory of God. And I know even now I've got some Baptist friends freaking out at what I'm saying, but I'm just telling you, I experienced the presence of the Lord in a way that I'd never had in that chapel service, and even at the revival, the outpouring itself. And so glad that we were able to harvest, a sound of the house, a sound of what was going on, which is kind of interesting. You talk about Lyndall and what were my impressions of it. Man, he was swampy blues guy, from Red Bay, Alabama, which is, not far from Muscle Shoals. So that was in his DNA. That sound was in his DNA, which I describe as kind of gospely, kind of swampy. It's
I have a clip here. This is Enemy's Camp, which I believe is like a very older Pentecostal song that they were kind of
it
putting.
is. Yeah, it is. But they did it every night.
That song is put in a medley with "Look What the Lord Has Done." Where did those songs come from? Because I remember looking at the copyrights as a kid, and I want to say they were written in the '70s.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. But these are things Lyndall grew up doing in his church in Red Bay, Alabama. And I would imagine a very Pentecostal upbringing, and that was just, he was doing them just about every night, at the revival service. I mean, you think of revival music, that's what I think of when I hear revival music. And yeah, so they were, it was germane to what was happening. That was the mandate. The mandate was, we're not gonna, have writers write songs for the Brownsville outpouring, right? We're going to take the songs that God is already using in the Brownsville revival and capture those, even if they're vineyard songs. And that was a bold, move, but you had to do it that way. And I just remember having those conversations with our our executives, because they're concerned about, man, the royalty load on this record is going to be higher because we don't have enough integrity copyrights on this. And I'm like, sorry, You want a Brownsville record, it's got to be this way. It's got to be the stuff that God is already using there. It's got to be their sound, and we're just capturing and harvesting that. And that's the way that thing went down. And we, the great. I think one of the reasons that that record has the stuff on it, really captured the sound of the worship there is because we sat up. We went in at the beginning of the week on a Monday, and Lenny LeBlanc produced that record.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
And yeah, because he and Lyndall were had a relationship. They were both, living in, North Alabama, Muscle Shoals area. And so they knew each other, and Lyndall felt really comfortable with Lenny producing and capturing the authentic sound of what God was doing there. And we were then the band for the whole week, all the revival services. So we didn't just show up and do, the recording, right? I wanted everybody to kind of experience and let what God was doing impact them and impact the stuff they impact the notes they were playing.
Hmm.
And yeah, and I was blessed to be able to play B3 on that record. And it was kind of by accident. Um, we had the band there, which was Gary Lunn, Steve Brewster on drums, Tom Hemby on electric guitar, Lyndall was on keys, Lenny played acoustic, um, and then all their singers and their choir.
Okay.
And we're there the first day, and um, somebody was like, "Well, anybody playing the B3 over here?" And Lenny was like, "Man, I hadn't really thought about it. Springer, why don't you play the B3?" And I was, yeah, because I was there just as an A&R guy, and so I'm like, "Okay, I'm in." And off we went, and an amazing week. Excuse me. There were. Let me get a little sip here. Wednesday night was the prayer service, the prayer meeting, and then Thursday, Friday, Saturday revival meetings every night. And I mean, these things would go 5, 6 hours long. And we would show up 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and people are wrapped around the building
Hmm.
waiting to get in. And if you know anything about Pensacola, in June it's hot,
Yeah.
and thunderstorms, afternoon thunderstorms. And in the rain and the heat, these people were wrapped around the building. So if you're asking me, like, what was God doing or why was that special? Man, I think it had a little bit to do with the expectation of the people that were showing up there, the hunger for the hopelessness, the people looking for healing, people looking for hope, whatever that looked like, whether that was healing or salvation or whatever it was. They came expecting because they had heard about this thing. um yeah, which was a little like the work of Jesus, right? He would have people coming showing up, for the same reason. They had heard that he turned the water into wine, so they're showing up, wherever they could encounter Jesus, to like the woman with the issue of blood, just to touch his garment. And I think that was the expectation, wrapped literally. The visual of that expectation was wrapped around the building.
Yeah, and that kind of expectation breeds powerful worship when we expect that God is
Yes.
show up with us. That's so great. And it's just I'm just trying to again place this on kind of like the historical plot. Like this is happening in the mid to late 90s. So this is happening like probably not too far off from the whole Hillsong experience as well. Like your life is pretty busy in the 90s.
Yeah. Yeah, and pretty fun.
Say. Well, another person that you've worked with and traveled with, and I'd be amiss to mention is Paul Wilbur, who's widely known for Messianic style worship. Can you speak to the significance of the sound he came with and where he came from and the experiences that you had with him on the road?
Absolutely, man. I love Paul Wilbur. um just such a great man. Yeah, and largely known for the Messianic uh, sound. Um, and I didn't really get to work on a ton of Paul Wilbur records like Steve Merkel did, Shalom Jerusalem, and the follow up, Jerusalem Arise, and I think I did one that we recorded in Houston actually called Holy Fire. Um, and I didn't really start traveling with Paul Wilbur until after, I mean, after my tenure at Integrity had ended.
Wow.
His son called me one day, "Hey, you'd be interested in coming and playing keyboards?" And so I've been in some pretty cool places. I mean, everywhere from Africa to Bolivia and Colombia, and just
The
tons of places in the U.S.
the question becomes, would you like to come and play? And can you play in minor keys?
Yes, yes. That's the only call too where he was like, can you play and sing? And if you know me, I'm not a singer, but I was like, yeah, sure.
That's great. That's awesome.
But man, I still love what Paul Wilbur does in his ministry. I mean, I've led worship with him, at Seder dinners, and just the deep, rich history and tradition. And I'm moved by that. I'm moved by that kind of the same way I'm moved by the folks that live in more the liturgical side of things. There's something about that that's really holy and really reverent, and so I feel the same about the Messianic worship as well. Just there's a lot of wonderful tradition there that's just holy and reverent and beautiful.
Love that. Well, we talked about some of these artists earlier, but I want to just kind of do a kind of play a couple of clips and talk about some projects and artists that you were involved in. The first one is man, we sang a lot of his stuff when I was a teenager. This is a song from Daryl Evans' "Let the River Flow" project.
Yeah.
There's nowhere else that I'd rather be than dancing with you as you sing away. There's nothing else that I'd rather than to worship you. So rejoice, be glad, rejoice, oh my soul, for the Lord your God, He reigns forevermore. I rejoice, for my God reigns. So rejoice, be glad, your Father and your friend is the Lord your God, whose rule will never end. I rejoice, for my God reigns, my God reigns, and I dance the dance of praise. My God reigns, with a shout I will proclaim. My God.
So this was from the era in the 90s that I remember that like acoustic worship was a big thing. In fact,
Yeah.
this record was like kind of billed as like this is acoustic live worship, and you could see things kind of changing coming out of that Tom Brooks era of keyboard driven worship to being
Right.
kind of acoustic. And I remember I think I had heard "Let the River Flow" first on I want to say a Vineyard project, but
That's right.
I remember these songs like the back of my hand. I remember just slick vocals on this project. What are your memories?
Man, so Paul Mills produced that. Paul and I got a call one day from Don, or maybe it was Chris Thomason that had called us and said, "Man, so there's we've got a report that there's this church in Tulsa that a lot of the students from ORU were going to on Wednesday night, and they're having some amazing worship led by this guy Daryl Evans who wrote "Let the River Flow." And we were familiar with the song. I loved that song, and I said, "Okay, we'll go check it out." So Paul and I kind of flew in, and attended one of those Wednesday night, prayer service kind of worship service, and it's all college kids. And again, kind of going to that same thing I was saying about the Brownsville thing, man, these students, and it was Open Bible Fellowship is the name of the church. It was in a storefront, strip mall storefront, low ceiling, low drop ceiling,
Right.
right? Not a cool venue at all. Um, but they had a stage set up, in a corner, and Daryl and his band would just come out, and it would be like a solid hour and a half, 2 hours of just worship. And if you know anything about Daryl, like if he does a 5-minute version of any of his tunes, I've never heard it, because every single tune is like 8 minutes, 10 minutes. He just and live, those things can go, he may sit there and let the river flow for 15 minutes and just hang out. And I played in his band, for a while after we had signed him, and it was nothing to, do like it's a 90-minute concert, and he got through 4 tunes, which
Wow.
is crazy, because he
Upset.
was all about the river flowing, and swimming in the stream, like he's going to hang out. And I loved that about him. But I had, again, never really seen anything like this is the first time I had ever seen the hop, in worship, in the whole room, all
Wow.
these college kids, from the first tune until he got to a ballad. I mean, they're just, and so Paul Mills and I are in the back of the room, and we're just hopping. There was so much freedom in the expression of worship that I had not experienced before. Just freedom to dance, to shout, to yell, to scream, to lift your hands, whatever. Everybody was for it, and
I think that translates on the recording, like even the opening track, New Song Horizon, Into My God Reigns.
yeah,
There's a fervency and a just kind of a freedom, hence the name of the second album, Freedom,
yeah,
on his
right,
projects. Okay, got another one here that I believe you were involved.
okay.
I just love Chip on Paul's records, man. It's just like I can feel and hear like the Tom Petty influences and
Oh, big time, big time. Wallflowers.
yeah, well, exactly. The laid back acoustic with the mandolin in there and just everything. I don't know if that's Carl on the drums, but just everything just so tight in the pocket. And
Yeah,
then
probably depends on which record. I can't remember which record that was from, but Carl played on. Say that again.
God of Wonders.
Yeah, no, so that was Dennis Holt. That was the only one where it was a different drummer. But I played on every one of Balash's records. Um, and still play on his stuff. He's one of my best friends. I love the guy like a brother.
Mm.
I think I mentioned in one of our earlier calls that um, he was one of the first guys I met, when I was put into song development,
Sure.
and we showed up at the songwriter retreat. I was maybe 2 weeks on the job, and they hosted a songwriter retreat down in Gulf Shores, or white sandy beaches of Alabama, and brought in all the writers and their wives, their spouses. And I had my wife Nancy with me, and we walk in, we're kind of in the back of the room because we don't know anybody. Like this is all new. I'm new on the job, and Paul and Rita were standing in the back as well. And I think we ended up at a table together, and we're all kind of like, you know, uh, wow, like who, I see so and so, I see so and so, they're we're all recognizing people, and that we should know but didn't really know. But it was a um, just a camaraderie between us, being kind of new. He was new on the scene too, as a young writer, and but I have always been a huge Balash advocate and fan, partly because, man, he's one of the hardest working writers that I know. Um, he's again, like, at the top of his game as a worship leader. The way he connects people in the room, connects with people in the room, disarms. He breaks down that stage, the barrier that the stage is. A lot of times, we're on a stage up there, and people think that we're the kind of the object, of attention or focus, and he breaks that down and just becomes a conduit. Um, and I love it. He can get, it gets uncomfortable sometimes. He'll say, y'all grab hands, hold the hand of the person next to you, and yet it works. And I just did a pastors conference with him back in February, and Jackson over in Jacksonville. And again, I hadn't because of COVID, I hadn't been out with him in probably over a year and a half, 2 years, but it was so refreshing to my soul, the way his style of leading worship, and the way he connects with the people in the room. And many of these folks have heard Above All and Open the Eyes of My Heart and Your Name, and that list goes on and on and on of big
Yeah.
songs Paul has written. And yet they're singing them like they're brand new, because of the way he, talks about the lyric of the song, or talks about the heart of what he was trying to communicate. Um,
Great.
yeah, one of my all-time faves. Definitely.
It's great. Here's
The First Love record.
Yeah. Oh
Can we
man,
talk about that for a second?
Matthew
That
Ward
record,
singing BGVs on that, tearing it up.
man, and all of the songs that are kind of hits that came off of that record. That record should have been called "Open the Eyes of My Heart." We weren't smart enough to recognize how big that song would become.
Totally, absolutely. Rise Up and Praise Him is off that. Paul's, version of the Happy Song, Delirious cover is on that.
Right?
Talk of
I
Ages,
could sing of your love forever.
Your Love Forever. Yeah. Yeah, that's that was, I remember when that project came out. Again, late 90s acoustic worship movement, your Daryl Evans, your Paul Balash, just a shift in instrumentation from what we kind of heard in the past. Uh,
Yeah.
another kind of revival that you kind of helped bring the soundtrack to was in Smithton, and I want to play a quick clip from the Smithton Outpouring Project. I don't know that I ever heard another project that Eric Nussum was worship leader on, but this one was incredible. And you were involved in it. Can you talk about your memories from it?
Yeah. Yeah. Eric Newsom, worship leader at this little church in the middle of Missouri, kind of nowhere, Missouri, right? It's out and yet God was, you know, pouring out his spirit in this place, a little church. So it presented a bunch of challenges, the size of the room being one of the biggest. The the other challenge was the songs. Just not a lot of original stuff being written out of that yet. Still kind of new in the process. And so rather than do a record of covers, um, I sent Daryl Evans to go to Smithton and write with Eric. And that's where Prepare the Way came from. And may have been others. I can't remember. I'd have to look at the track list on that one. It may have been others, but that Daryl co-wrote. But that was largely a co-written, project. And yeah, Eric did a great job. I remember Pastor Steve and his wife Kathy coming to Mobile and recording their stuff. They also ministered at our chapel that week, and yeah, that wasn't quite as popular as the Brownsville record was, and I think that's just the Brownsville was you know early, it was first on the scene, and in terms of the U.S. revival movement, right? And we were hearing a lot about Brownsville and what was going on over there, and Smithton, just I don't think there was a lot of fanfare or hoopla about it. So I don't know that a lot of people found that record, but it's very good.
Totally.
Good tunes.
One more clip. This again is a cover. I first heard this song on a Passion record, but I have a great deal of affection for the place where this was recorded, just because a lot of my friends are serving out there now. But this is Ross Parsley, "Around Your Throne," recorded out at New Life in Colorado.
I'm forgiven because you are forsaken. I'm accepted. You were condemned, and I'm alive and well. Your spirit. So lately, I've been waking.
We got a bonus advertisement there. I always say, like, the world could be coming to an end, and you will have to watch an advertisement before you
Right.
hear about Armageddon. But
That's the truth.
you got the gist of it. Of course, that's Billy James
Yeah.
Holt's song "You're My King," which was a huge for those who
Yeah.
maybe were born after the '90s. Like, this was, you think of like the classic song,
Gosh.
"Your Shout to Lords," "How Great Is Our God." Well, that came in a little bit later, but "You Are My King" was a huge song. And
Yes.
talk about a talented singer and composer, Ross Parsley. Didn't do a whole lot of songwriting, but the songs that he did write were, really great. And just anytime I listen to him lead worship, it just sounds so natural and effortless. Can you talk about some of your experiences out at New Life and that project?
Man, absolutely. I actually produced that record and played on it, played piano on it. Um, what was happening there at New Life was, again, just another pocket of, God pouring himself out, kind of like what was going on in Hillsong. These partnership with churches instead of artists was a very intentional model, to and if you look at it, um, what came out of New Life, think of the Desperation Band, so John Egan, Jared Anderson, who had a fantastic solo career and has contributed, wonderful songs, like The Great I Am and
Even
countless others.
"Hear Us from Heaven" has to be one of
Hear
my
Us from
favorite
Heaven,
prophetic
yes,
songs. Yeah, it's great.
yes, and Glenn Packiam. I mean, a lot of wonderful worship leaders and songwriters have come out of New Life. There still are, and that's the amazing thing is, man, God is still moving in that place. And Ross, who's now a pastor, he's a pastor of a church in, I think, in Austin, um, Texas. But man, just a great leader and able to build an amazing team, talented folks around him too. And that was including his brother Brad Parsley, who's a
Right,
fantastic
right.
singer.
What was
But
what
yeah,
was
I got
his,
great
what was
memories.
his song? Didn't he have something about didn't his brother write a popular worship song, or am I getting him confused with somebody else? Gosh, there's a song that's on the tip of my tongue, and if I said the name of it,
Hmm.
um, All I have in my brain is "Let the Praises Ring" from our previous conversation. If it comes to me, I'll mention it. Um, but yeah, New Life Worship, another great movement of God. I remember, listening to all those Desperation Band records. Were you involved in being A&R for Desperation Band as well?
Yeah, on some of them. Jeff Quimby, who was an A&R guy for Vertical, our Vertical imprint, did a lot of the early Desperation Band stuff, and I got involved in the maybe the last couple of projects they did.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, but those guys, I mean, I can't say enough great things about Jared and John, um, and Glenn, who's now pastor. He's a pastor of one of the New Life, churches there in the
Yeah.
Springs.
Chris, can you help us understand the role that an A&R person has in choosing songs for projects and really how this was done at Integrity?
Ooh, yeah, okay. Again, it kind of goes back to what we were saying at the beginning of this call, just the somebody holding the bar high. And I think independent artists or artists that don't have a label or anybody, um, kind of holding their feet to the fire can easily go record the first 10 songs they write or the first 12, songs they write. Um, that was definitely not the process at Integrity, but I learned that from Don, and Don just always, kind of held that bar really high. Oftentimes, like even my relationship with Balash, my A&R relationship with Balash was one of the easier ones because this guy he'd go write 30 tunes, and we would then pick 10 or 12, and oftentimes even those he would go back and rewrite and just constantly he would toil over every lyric. I don't know if you know Paul,
Yeah,
but that kind of defines him. He's his own worst critic and knows what, like, he'll tell himself that's a throwaway line. That's just cheese. That's just a placeholder.
sure.
I'm not going to waste an opportunity to really impart some truth or to say something meaningful just to go for the easy rhyme. And those were the challenging conversations. And I tell you, the hard work of A&R really began the more successful an artist got, because then they've got more clout. They've got more, I guess, votes, seats at the table or whatever, like the more, it's tough to really push back on an artist who sold, 500,000 units of the
Yeah.
last record, right? Um, but that didn't let them off the hook. In fact, if you ever noticed artists that had great success on their first record, and I could give you some examples maybe off the record, but I won't do it on the record. But an artist that had wonderful success on the first record, and then every record after that, less success, less success, less success. It's easy for me to spot because I can see it happening in real time. Um, they've got more influence, more control in the process, and ultimately more power, to go, no, I want to do this song that my boys wrote, or,
Sure.
versus having a team of people going, nah, nah, nah.
The other thing I've thought of as well, the first album that someone cuts, they've had, however old they are, they've had that entire lifespan to write those songs. The sophomore
Right.
album presents a different
You got
challenge
a year.
because you got 6 months these days, right? You got, if you want to
Yes.
stay in the machine. So, and that, you're a professor of worship. Bring us into your classroom and answer me this. What do you think makes for an enduring worship song?
Yeah. Um, I think actually I've kind of covered it a little bit, just those songs that are born out of, devotion and personal worship, and not necessarily just setting out to write a great song, and I think of a song like Open the Eyes of My Heart that was inspired, and I don't know if you've ever heard Paul tell that story about being in a service and hearing this older gentleman get up to pray, and he prayed that line, and Paul just starts singing that line, and it stuck with him. Did he finish the song right there? No, but he took that inspired idea, thought, God breathed hook, if you will, and then spent the next week or however long really adding putting the framework to it, and yet preserving the part that was God breathed and inspired. And I saw that happen actually with another Balazs song, Above All. And that was a song that, and Paul and I joke about this often, that it had like maybe 4 or 5 different iterations before the one everybody knows. And man, he was pitching that song. It's like every couple of months I'd get a cassette from Paul or a DAT tape from Paul with this new version of Above All. How about this? What do you think of this? Did I get it? And be like, man, I really like the A section, but it needs a chord. Like it's missing something. Then this chorus doesn't seem to fit. And he took that idea. He had scheduled a writing appointment with Lenny LeBlanc, so he went up to Muscle Shoals, Florence, Alabama area, and spent a few days, staying at Lenny's house. They were buds, good friends and stuff. So that wasn't unusual for them to hang out and writing, hanging out, eating, writing some more. And Paul said, hey, well, I got one other little thing. So it's towards the end of, the day. And Paul played him the verse that he had. Above all power, above all king. And I think the story goes that Lenny kind of stayed back in the room while Paul left and went to the kitchen and was thinking about dinner or whatever. And Lenny kind of hammered out that crucified, lay behind the stone. And then they got together, played it, he played it for him, and it was like that was the missing piece of the song. He sent it to me, and I'm like, this song is done. Now we can record it. But
that song.
oftentimes it's a combination of the two, right? It's the the understanding the craft of lyric writing, understand that how what is a good lyric, what makes a good lyric, but taking things that were God inspired and then applying the craft to that idea.
I love that. And man, one of my favorite lines, it's so easy to sing over this line. And then when you really think about it, it's just like, it's so rich, but just that simple line, there's no way to measure what you're worth. Like
Yeah.
what a great catapult into the chorus. Like
Yeah. I know.
when you think about, you kind of think about that lyric. It's like, yeah, there are no metrics to weigh the value and the worthiness of Christ. And what a beautiful way of saying that. Yeah, it's
What's crazy is, like, I've got a story about that song, too. I mean, because it was a beautiful song. We obviously recorded it, and I had recorded it on a couple of different projects. I did it on one of the Women of Faith records. Because we had a partnership with the Women of Faith conferences
yeah,
for
I
10
remember that.
years. Yeah, for 10 years, I managed the worship team. I put together the worship for all those conferences. I had several teams or a couple of teams of 4 girls that would go out and do these and leapfrog around the country doing those conferences. And part of that was then creating a project for the theme of the conference that year. And I think the Extravagant Grace year, I did a record called Extravagant Grace that had Above All on it. But I'm telling you that to set up the fact that I was at home the morning George W. Bush got inaugurated the first time,
Yeah.
and Michael W. Smith comes out, you know, uh, sits down at a grand piano, pulls out a piece of paper out of his suit jacket and sets it up on the piano and starts playing above all powers, above all kings. And I'm like, holy cow, what is going on? I think I called Paul, who was sitting there eating a bowl of Cheerios while he was watching inauguration, and just we're somewhat, gobsmacked, stunned that, like, how did he even know about this song? Like, where? And I think we determined that his wife had been to one of the Women of Faith conferences, bought the CD, brought it home, and was playing it in the house. And that's where he heard it. Not that's all kind of folklore. I'm not sure how much of that is actual reality or fact, but I it's just you can never underestimate the reach of a good song, and it could be the most circuitous path to somebody hears it in an obscure project like a Woman of Faith project. That was kind of crazy, right?
Unbelievable, just to see how God will work in those crazy ways. And man, as much as that is a signature song for Paul, other people know it from Michael W. Smith, and know it from
Right,
Lenny, Lenny's album too, that was a
right.
great project, his Above All project. We talked about this a little earlier about, in some ways you're chasing the move of God, and from there you find these worship leaders. Do you have any unique stories on how you discovered any worship leaders?
Man, I'm trying to think. I'm sure that I do, and yet, um,
I don't know, like maybe something unexpected, or you visited a church on a whim, or maybe you went and you were honestly like not expecting much and then were surprised.
yeah. Well, I definitely the Lincoln Brewster encounter and meeting, was one of those, kind of crazy things. But yeah, Ricardo Sanchez at Free Chapel, who was at Free Chapel, Jensen Franklin's church in
Yep.
Gainesville, Georgia, north of Atlanta. And that was definitely one. I had heard about Ricardo through Israel, and just I was through Atlanta all the time, so it was pretty easy for me to just pop in on a Sunday, and check out the service, and then meet with Ricardo, have lunch with Ricardo, and kind of dream together about, hey, what would a Free Chapel record look like or sound like, and would you be interested? And so that was, and I wish, I wish it was a bigger story to tell in terms of Ricardo's success. But man, my belief level and every record I did was the same as it was always the same. I mean, if we were doing the record, I mean, there may be a couple of exceptions to that, but generally, I really believed in that every artist that I worked with and every record that we made had the potential to be a million seller.
It's great. That's so great. What are some of the common deficiencies that you see in worship leaders that often need to be strengthened, encouraged, and developed? You worked with a lot of people, even on a personal basis, and I'm curious to see if there's any common threads that you're just like, yep, there's that spirit of comparison here, or yep, there's this, and they don't even necessarily have to be critical things, but are there common things that you often found yourself just like always having to encourage a worship leader in or grow them in?
I think, yeah, absolutely. I've had worship leaders struggle with, different, sin issues. But if you're a good worship leader, chances are you're also a very melancholy person. May have had some anxiety. It's like I think those are all the things that make worship leaders great, or a great worship leader great. Is they're sensitive. You know, and yet at the same time, that can't be a thorn in your side. And so all of those things you said, just um, belief level, confidence, um, are definitely things that it's like the comparison comment that you made. I see that in just about everyone, every single
Yeah.
one. Man, why? And especially when when you're looking through the lens of the guy at the label,
Oh,
because they're comparing their marketing budget to somebody else's marketing budget, or why didn't I get the kind of radio promotion so and so got. So there's that angle too. But I think at the end of the day, the worship leaders that have been the most successful are the ones that kept the main thing. And by that, I mean, they saw label, record, distribution, all of that stuff as a distraction from their real call, which was pastoring their local church, pastoring the people that God had put in, them, because the whole itinerant worship thing is fraught with flaws, like and it being the lack of community, the lack of growing as a disciple of Christ, the lack of making other disciples of Christ. You're in this real insulated environment where you can kind of pop in and pop out. Nobody really knows you, right? Like you are known in your own community. And so I'm always a little like with the close to 20 years of experience, at Integrity. I was there for 18 years, by the way, but but that experience still has continued into this last decade too. And everything that I have seen has led me to believe that the ones that are chasing that thing aren't going to be effective at the main thing because they're so distracted by this thing, and it becomes just a big distraction. And so I'm always, even these days, I'm always, interested in the guys who are taking time because somebody on their team's wife has cancer, and they're ministering to that family's needs. It's the real work, right? It's the real work of what we're called to do. All this other stuff is the accoutrements that kind of come along with it. Publishing deals and record deals can all be good in terms of exposure, and getting your message out to even more people. And that's just the vehicle to do that with. But it's just an addition to this thing. I don't know if I communicated that very clearly, but
No, that is so helpful. That's great. That is so great. Tell me this, Chris, of all the songs that you either oversaw cutting on integrity projects or wrote yourself, which ones are your favorite and why?
man,
Choosing your children.
gosh,
Go on.
that's a tough one, man. That's a tough one. I mean, obviously, Shout to the Lord was one of those pivotal tunes in my career, like just to be connected with that in a very small way, was just meaningful. I have this memory of going to a church, and I can't really even remember where it was now, but I had gone to a church, kind of what I was talking about, just showing up to a church on a Sunday morning. It may have been in Phoenix, and I was there um, visiting Keith Staten or hanging out. And he was the worship leader at this church, or it may have been BJ Putnam's church. But anyway, I was in the back of the room, just anonymous congregant observer, hanging out, worshiping. And it was like from the first song to the last song before the pastor preached, every single one of those songs I vividly remembered being a part of, and had, and I just had this overwhelming sense of, like, it humbled me. It didn't have the effect you would think that it would have, like puffing you up and going, wow, look what I did. That was my thumbprint, and I touched every. It had the absolute opposite effect that humbled me to the point of tears, where I recognized the weight of and the responsibility of my position, to be a good steward of these things that God had entrusted me with, and to shepherd them well. And I hope that's the testimony that I don't want anybody to remember my name. It's like I'm just a guy. Like if you're a geek who reads credits on the back of your vinyl, and
Me.
I'm one of those guys, you may recognize my name, but average listener has no clue who Chris Springer is, and I kind of like it that way. And because it's never been about me, it's always been about me trying to be a good shepherd or a good steward of these precious gems, that God had given to these artists and writers, and really wanted to, you know, see other people impacted by them too.
Chris, tell me, you've been involved in so many like live worship projects. Do you have any memories? Were there any projects that were just a challenge to record? Like the recording night, something maybe went off, or you saw God work in a miraculous way to bring the whole thing together just because, you know, stuff went wrong. Are there any projects that stand out to you that had challenges like that?
Some of the toughest ones to figure out were those songwriter ones that so whether it was um, the two we did in Nashville at the Foundry. I think one of those was called "Open the Eyes of My Heart."
Are these just like the song, all the songwriters from Integrity, like the Rock of Ages one, Praise Adonai, that stuff?
That stuff. Um, and then we did a couple, and when I say a couple, anytime we would do one, we went ahead and did every writer do two songs, so we get two records out of this thing. And so we did a couple projects, in one recording out at the World Prayer Center with that's next door to New Life Church,
Yeah.
and those were I think all of those writer records were great, but they were challenges because how many artists do you got in the room? And as you know, artists, they can be a little high maintenance, and so everybody's like, hey, why does he get to do this and I can't do that? And why is he going first and I'm last? Yes.
Are you in the middle managing all these tensions?
I produced them and A&R'd them, and was
Sure.
director of song development. I was like the publishing guy at the time too. So I mean, it was.
You like the interaction I've had with you, you come off as like an encouraging, upbeat person that could probably maybe has a gift in diffusing things like that. Is that part of your skill?
I think that's been shaped out of me through the fire. Yeah.
Other question here. What is it about some of the projects, specifically in the Hosanna music series, that made them so globally influential? I know we talked about Shout to the Lord, but there's other projects too that just had a wide, far-reaching impact. Canada, UK, Europe, Africa. Um,
Yeah.
in what ways were the projects that kind of had a global influence forwarding the modern worship movement and becoming the soundtrack for what God was doing in North America?
Yeah, I would just say that nobody else was doing it to that extent. Like I think that yeah, you could talk about the quality of the projects themselves, versus what other worship companies, i.e., Maranatha Vineyard, were doing. I mean, and they all had really distinct sounds, right? But I think in some ways they were all quality, recordings, on a practical, quality, the recording, um, the sonics and all of that. I mean, they were all fairly good, and yet integrity outsold all of those in a way. And I think it really speaks to how, this direct model that Mike had and Ed Lindquist had kind of orchestrated and pioneered. Um, that was the reach, and part of it was people were hungry for the sound of that. Like they didn't, so yeah, we see this mandate, to worship God in spirit and truth. We see the term worship all throughout in our churches kind of trying to do it, but there's no real model for it. And so that was the genius, is that all of a sudden there's a model for it, and you can hear it, and then in later years you can see it,
Yeah.
and because of the video. And I think those were key benchmark high watermarks for integrity. It's when they did those first video of a worship event, and I'm not even sure which one it was, but probably Lift Him Up.
It was Ron Canoli's Lift 'Em Up. Yep.
Yeah, and then Shalom Jerusalem and others became kind of a model. It's like, wow, look at this pageantry and all of that. But Lift 'Em Up didn't have a lot of that pageantry, right? It was just, you know, some talented people in a room really celebrating, and they looked like they were having a good time. And you could see these excellent, musicians actually playing skillfully on their instrument, which is another thing Scripture commands
Yeah.
us to do. And so I think it became many will see, hear, and put their trust in the Lord.
Yeah, I love it. I love that. That's great. See here, put their trust in the Lord. Tell me this, were there any projects with integrity that for whatever reason were never released or never came together that kind of got shelved? And can you share any details?
Yes, there were, and no, I can't.
Fair enough. Fair
Sorry,
enough.
man. I mean,
No,
we could debrief, and I can kind of give you a little when we're off the record. But yeah, man, I wouldn't feel comfortable talking about
no, for
some of that.
sure. But there were occasions where just for whatever reasons things wouldn't come together and they would have to be shelved and they'd have to be on the cutting room floor, as I guess they say.
That's right. We tried, I think, in a couple of occasions to figure out like, hey, can we rebrand it, call it something else? Maybe even put a different singer on it. And I think in one case um, that was a thing that we had done. We had a worship leader that was having just it was a moral dilemma,
Sure.
and yet the record was recorded, and we then took that record, put a different worship leader on that record, and basically was like, hey, stand here, sing this exactly this way. I know it's not your key. Sing it this
Do your
key.
best.
Do your best. That record was I can't remember the title of the record, but Michael Neal was the worship leader that ended up singing on that one. It was great. It was great. He did a great job. I know he would say that was his least favorite project because it wasn't his project.
Sure, sure, for sure. So, having worked with so many worship leaders, what would you say are some of the character qualities that make for an effective worship leader who has longevity in ministry? What are some of the common pitfalls to avoid?
Hmm. Yeah, it seems kind of like a similar question we were, just talking about. I think the things that make a good worship leader a good worship leader are that they're called to ministry first. And I think oftentimes, and you've seen it, I'm sure, that guys get put in that position because they look cool, they got a good voice, and maybe they're a decent writer, maybe a great writer, but they're not called to ministry. And I just don't see guys or gals lasting very long in that position. Um, but I think especially these days, man, there's so many pastors that want the hottest, greatest, youngest, coolest thing leading their worship, and yet they've not done the hard work of whether it's discipleship or just learning how to disciple other. They haven't gone through the spiritual leadership you know course and book, like some of the basic stuff they're not about.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. And
Grieves me, but you can spot it. Usually the thing you can spot is their team is all paid, you know and they don't hang around for very long. They're not really bought in to the ministry of the church. In other words, you don't see them going to the a grow group or serving, doing community service projects. They're not engaged on that level. And I
right.
think it's important that even the worship team and even the worship leader is engaged on that level, if you're going to lead your people in worship. And
Absolutely. Yep, you got to love the
other,
people more than the music.
yeah, 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 yeah. And the other character trait is just leadership, just strong leadership. Somebody that people want to follow.
Yeah.
They want to, like, hey, we're your army. Tell us where to go. We're going to go. We're going to fight. We're going to do battle in the heavenlies. That's I'm looking for that leader to follow.
So great. That is great wisdom. Final question.
Yeah.
And you kind of touched on this, but I'd love to just, pitch the ball to you one more time. What do you hope is the testimony of your contributions to the modern worship movement?
Man, that I made his name famous. and everything I did, not Chris Springer's name, not even um, Integrity Music or whatever label I was affiliated with or organization I was affiliated with. I mean, it, that's the which is really no legacy at all when you think about it. That's the legacy I hope to leave, is no legacy at all, is that it really, everything that I did pointed people to him, and that all of the behind the scenes work that I did and details that I was, had my hands on, that nobody even knows. Like that's why I did what I did. That's why I was serving in the way that I was serving, was so that nobody had to um, think, oh, why aren't there lyrics on the screen? Or, like, it's the crazy thing about um, distractions in worship, is that they disconnect people. And so, when you preach excellence, or you preach giving God our best, I mean, those are honorable things, right? He's worthy of our best. But on a practical level, we have to be about our best to keep people engaged in the presence of the Lord and minimize the distractions that are caused when you sing a wrong word or play a wrong note, or something tech goes wrong. Those all become distractions that cause people to disengage. And so that's, if that's the legacy, that it was, that we held the bar high, I'm okay with that. But ultimately, I hope that there is no legacy, that the legacy is that it all pointed people to him. And yeah.
Amen. Amen to all that. Chris, I've enjoyed this so much. Just love hearing your story, your God story of how God's used you.
Dude.
Really quick, just as we wrap up, give us a really quick update with, your family, the projects that you're involved, the things that are exciting you these days, and even ways that we can pray for you.
Man, okay, so the things I'm excited about these days, I'm sitting in um, 880 studios here on the campus of University of Mobile, and it's a wonderful recording studio, world class um, gear and stuff. I pick up the computer, but it's attached to try to give you a tour. But it's a beautiful room. I teach, I'm a certified Pro Tools instructor, so I teach the recording arts stuff. I teach, students how to, use Pro Tools, how to use microphones. I teach a whole class on microphone theory, and it's everything you ever wanted to know about a microphone. I teach, advanced recording classes, which is a project driven class. So we're assigning projects, having students go out, find an artist and writer to work with. And I teach them actually some A&R skills too, and how to work with their artist, how to develop the songs, how to come up with the plan to record it, and then ultimately how to use all the knowledge that you've learned about recording and engineering and microphones and the software to actually execute a project. All of this in a semester. Well, that course is over 2 semesters, so they've got a year to kind of do some pretty cool stuff, and it keeps them in this room, and that's where you learn, is in the
In
room.
the room, getting reps. That's so
But
great.
that's one of the things I'm doing. I'm still on staff at Redemption Church in Mobile here. Abby Maggio is the worship leader. I'm the MD, and I get to serve her. She was one of my students here. I remember when she came in as a freshman,
So good.
and just blew
Love
the doors off this place. Genuine heart for worship, and great leadership skills, and is called to ministry. All the things we've been talking about, and I was just in Los Angeles the week before last with her, because we were leading worship at the Southern Baptist Convention, and so
Amazing.
amazing to see a former student now become boss, now launched worldwide, in front of Baptists from all over the world, leading them in worship. And it's awesome. So those are the things. I mean, we're writing original stuff. We're recording on a regular basis and trying to release, our stuff out there. Of course, you know how that is. There's a ton of people doing the same thing, but we do it because the focus is about creating, original songs for our people, or original arrangements of hymns for our people and our culture here, our community here. So those are the things I'm about. Still married to Nancy, over 40 years, and got two adult sons, 24 and 26 now, and yeah, so they're launched into adulthood. So it's just Nancy and I, and got the studio at the house, always working on projects. Been working on a ton of new Don Moen content um, that he's continually putting up on his YouTube channel, donmoen.tv. And so you'll see me on that. I've got shameless plug. Okay, so piano player, classically trained. I love to play the piano. That's my expression of worship to my creator, is when there's nothing as powerful for me as when I'm sitting at my piano playing to him. And so go check me out, Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, whatever, but Piano, Hymns, and Worship, Volume 1. And I've got another project that a lot of people are using in their times of devotion, intercession, study, Bible study, called Piano Solitude. And I hope you hope
So
you check
great.
those out and
Yeah.
connect with those, because I'm making more. I'm in the process of recording more solo piano stuff too.
Go check those out. Chris, this has been wonderful. I know we'll speak for a little bit offline, but thank you so much for your time and thank you for sharing your story. It's been a pleasure.
Man, thank you. It's been such an honor. God bless you guys.